Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, optimize, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and scale. And today's guest is Rachel Lebowitz. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Adi. Thank you so much for having me today.
You are very welcome. Okay, and Rachel, we're going to have a great conversation today about the second in command, the COO, the integrator of the company, which is always a great topic to talk about because that role is so important and it can definitely get neglected, and you are definitely an advocate for it. So let me introduce you with your bio, and then we'll add more to it, and we start our discussion, okay? Good. So you are a spouse of a flaming visionary. You are a mother of 3 entrepreneurs in the making. And you are the founder of Empowered COO, which is unique. You have a unique approach to coaching integrators and second in command.
Yeah. So
You're an author too, by the way.
Of course, I authored my book, Empowered COO. And what I realized was that so many second in commands were getting resentment, burnout, and full of self-doubt. And it didn't make sense. And the same visionary would hire 3 different integrators, but for some reason it wouldn't click. And that's when I realized that there's a certain uniqueness about this relationship. And if integrators are not aware of the things that can get them tripped up, then they will constantly, get burnt out in that role. And I think it has a lot to do with processes, because you and I spoke a while ago and we spoke about processes, and the integrator's in charge of processes, right? And documenting. And there is that fine line between going too far and over documenting versus keeping things flowing.
Absolutely. That's right. So what are the things that will trip up the integrator or the second in command or the COO?
Sure. So in order to understand what will trip them up, you have to understand the difference in the DNA between a visionary and an integrator. So when I think about visionaries, I think about people that are hyper-focused on goals. They're constantly looking for more. It's safe to say that visionaries have a little bit of an addictive personality. So they're constantly chasing something. And that need for more creates like tunnel vision, where they're so focused on the goal that anything that doesn't fit into that goal, they see as an obstacle. And in 2 words, how we can define the primary goals for visionary is a need for freedom and winning. So every visionary story, if you ask them, it's something around, I worked for somebody else and I didn't want to be told what to do, so I went and I did my own thing. Visionaries call themselves unemployable, right? And they have a need for winning, so they constantly want more and more. Now, on the other hand, integrators, second in command, so if you think about like people that have that addictive personality, they automatically attract somebody that is a great enabler. And I think we gave a bad rap to the word enabler. It just means somebody that loves making things happen. Well, when somebody has bad goals, of course, you're going to enable bad things to happen. But when they have good goals, you're going to enable good things to happen. And that need to make things happen, that follow through, comes from a need for validation and, acceptance, validation, and security. So there's that certain security that an integrator gets, and every time they do something and they follow through and they get something done, it's very validating. The mistake that integrators make is that they seek that validation externally from the visionary or the team instead of self-validating. So that is where they get tripped up. Because I always say this, and this is the last chapter in my book, I talk about this. Who is your puppeteer? That's how I titled the chapter. Because if the visionary has a bad day, but you did a great job, and they walk in and they're in a bad mood, are you going to rate yourself at a 1 or a 10 because the visionary is giving you attitude? If you don't self-validate yourself, you'll rate yourself as a 1 because, well, if the visionary is in a bad mood, then it must be that I did something wrong. But if you are very confident that you're doing the right thing, you're following the vision, you're making sure the business is moving forward, then it doesn't matter what mood the visionary is when they walk in. So that's the difference between self-validation versus seeking validation from others. And so on my Empowered CEO assessment, there was like a assessment I have on my website that you can take that will tell you how likely you are to get burnt out. And when you get the results, it's broken down into 5 different areas that cause burnout.
Okay, let's talk about those 5 areas. What are the 5 areas of burnout?
Sure. So the first one is when we get trapped in people pleasing versus having boundaries. And again, when you go back to the foundation of that, it's always coming back to that validating piece. If you're looking to be nice and kind and you want others to like you, then you might be people pleasing and then betraying yourself. So you're not going to have boundaries. So maybe you're giving too much time, too much energy. You're saying yes to things that you don't want to because you want people to like you, but then you're not having boundaries. You're feeling burnt out. You're doing too much. You're feeling unappreciated because you've given too much. This
About boundaries. I mean, I like what you're saying in terms of boundaries. You know, we have to be very aware of what we want to do, what we don't want to do. What would be let's do some give some examples of concrete boundaries that if you actually put those boundaries, it will prevent burnout.
Sure. So integrators sometimes tell me I was up till 1 o'clock answering emails or whatever, and they're resentful and they're tired. Instead, which the next, like one of the things is assertive communication versus passive communication. So setting a boundary is saying you can email me anytime, but I will not respond to emails past 6 o'clock. So that preserves your energy. Boundaries is knowing where do you start and where do you end. So is this out of your jurisdiction? If the visionary if there was a business owner and they decide to make a decision that is beyond your scope of work, beyond your role, it's not in your day-to-day decision. Let's say they decide to take a loan for personal reasons. It's not anymore in your area of what you're doing. Well, a boundary is saying if you're going to do that, I'm not going to be able to support you. So it comes together with assertive communication. It's understanding what am I responsible for? Where do I start and where do I end? And it also goes into emotionally. So not picking up the visionary's moods, not responding to their irritations, and instead being able to preserve your energy so you don't feel so drained all the time.
Absolutely. So you set up your boundaries in terms of, I think it's not just for integrators, it's in any workplace. You have to have a schedule. You have to have boundaries, what acceptable and what is not acceptable. You know, people should be respectful of other people's lives in terms of having a life. Absolutely. When you're communicating, you want to communicate it, and you can communicate it in such a way that is still pleasant and kind. It doesn't have to be mean, but it is assertive of what you want to do, for sure. And sometimes you also have visionaries that are nice and come in a good mood, right? So that's also can be. It doesn't always have to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, they're that nice that you want to do everything for them. Visionaries are very charismatic. I always joke like they can sell you something that you already own. If I have a pair of shoes in my closet that I don't like, a visionary can convince me and make me like it again, you know?
Right. That's part of their charm. And that's why we like visionaries. Good.
Right.
So we covered the 3 parts. What are the other 2 parts?
So assertive communication, right? We spoke about it a little bit, but I find that many integrators don't say what they actually mean. So they might become passive. They say, "Yeah, sure, I'll take care of it," or whatever, or and they sulk inside. And they expect the people to know what they're feeling. And it doesn't work like that. You have to be able to communicate in a way that is effective, that where you honor the other person's needs and your own needs. And that is why I created this chat bot called Empowered Bot, because it's programmed to help second in command learn how to communicate more effectively with visionaries, keeping in mind the visionaries' DNA for their freedom of winning and for their need for freedom and winning. So that is one part. Then there is caretaking versus empowering others. So many integrators don't realize how they become the bottleneck. And that is because they have such a need for things to be done a certain way and done right. Because when they do it a certain way, they get that validation. So they start becoming the bottleneck where they don't delegate and they don't empower their team. They end up taking on too much work. They end up, giving people everyday fish instead of teaching them to fish. And this is around a lot, learning how to become a great facilitator and coach and learning how to ask questions instead of giving answers. One of the things I always tell my integrators that I coach one-on-one, one of the things I tell them too is I put them on a word diet. And I challenge them for 1 week only to ask questions and not give answers and solutions to their team members so that they can actually teach people how to think more critically.
Yeah, think for themselves. I like that. So give me an example. Let's give our listeners an example of a real situation in a workplace where it would be better to ask a question than to give a solution.
It can go from the smallest to the biggest issue. A customer called, they're not happy with their product. Instead of saying, give them a refund, you can ask the manager, what did you ask them? What do you think we should do? What's possible to be done? How do you think this is going to affect our reviews, our revenue? Make that person think. One little question that I love teaching integrators to ask, and I ask integrators, I always say, if you were the boss, what would you do? It opened up such a world of possibilities.
Yeah, or if obstacles were not, because, sometimes we think about things and immediately we think about obstacles. So I like to say, well, if there were no obstacles, what would you do? Because that gives you the ideal solution. And then we go, okay, if maybe we cannot go for that and we identify what obstacles exist, then what is the second best solution? So that can also be a way of asking, but you're right, it's asking the questions because at some point they will then ask the questions themselves and not come to you with questions.
Right, exactly.
Great. So we covered, did we have another one that we didn't
So
cover?
we have another two. Another thing that it's dependency versus interdependence. Many integrators fall into a rut where they hesitate to make decisions. They drag out decision making. They look for validation and acceptance from the visionary in order to make decisions. And that comes from wanting to please or not being sure about themselves because visionaries are powerful and they're very confident. And sometimes when you're next to somebody that's super confident, you could start doubting yourself. And this might cause you to not make decisions fast enough, which actually will hinder the business and the visionary. So instead, learning how to bring solutions to the visionary and not questions. So, for example, this is what I've tried. This is what I think I want to do. What do you think? Instead of asking, what should I do, right? Be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I find many integrators, when they hit a roadblock, they become part of the problem. And this super irritates visionaries. Visionaries all the time tell me, like, this is one of their biggest, hiccups. And the idea is to also not get stuck in too much facts and data, which kind of hits on the last thing. Many integrators, if you're burnt out, if you are caught in this enmeshment and people pleasing, you might turn into very black and white thinking instead of flexible thinking. So if you need a lot of facts, many integrators hide behind data. So they won't come to conclusion or solution before they have a ton of data. Well, guess what? Visionaries don't need a lot of data. And really, we can trust our gut at one point. Like if you've seen enough and you are confident that this is the right decision, the problem is they're afraid to come forward and say, I feel that this is the right decision. Maybe they're afraid of backlash. Maybe they're afraid of being wrong, right? Which comes back to that need for validation and acceptance. Because if I am wrong, then people won't like me. So being okay with not being liked, being okay with making mistakes, being okay with not having all the information all the time, and not being so rigid. And I think this is where it ties a lot into creating processes, right? We don't want to be rigid around our processes. We want to systemize the predictable so we can humanize the exceptional.
Absolutely. And that's what we're creating. We're creating the systems, the road, the what is there, the road, how do you travel, but how, like where to travel, but how do you actually use it? It's up to each individual. And that's why we have people actually wearing those hats in order to execute it. But I really liked what you said in terms of the data, enough data to make and presenting a solution, because what I also found is that visionaries, and not only visionaries, but it does work with visionaries, is they want to know the end goal. They're not necessarily interested in how we're going to get there, so long as there is a solution. Like, I'm going to solve this problem. You want apples. Okay, so the solution is, okay, we're going to get you apples, and we're going to get you that many apples, and it will take me that much time. The fact that I'm going to go to the store, I'm going to pick it up, I'm going to look at it, I'm going to put it in a bag, I'm going to pay for it, and I'm going to bring it, it's unnecessary data that can be given if needed, but it's really not necessary sometimes. And sometimes the integrator will have that need to explain how it's being done when it's not necessarily really to the final solution.
Yeah, that's because of that need for validation. But if you remember, a visionary's primary need is freedom and winning. So they want what I call the bluff. That's the bottom line up front. They want to know, okay, where are we going? What's the end goal? Because they're solution-oriented people, they're goal-oriented people. On my website, I have a free resource that's called a How to Speak Visionary document. And it's 10 ways on how to speak to visionaries so that they hear you, and how to listen so you're on the same page. So the idea of the bottom line up front is give them the bottom line, what you want first, and then go backwards. Start with the end in mind. And this might require for you as an integrator, before you step into a same page meeting, before you have any conversation with your visionary, ask yourself, what's the outcome that I want? If we aren't clear with what we want, how can we ask the visionary to help us? And we waste a lot of time by trying to figure it out together, but that's not what the visionary wants. They want you to be clear, bring it to the visionary, and then they can help you. I saw Jeff Bezos saying that the higher level executive you are, the less decisions you should be making, but the more impactful your decisions should be. So a visionary that only makes 2 or 3 great decisions a day, it's great. You don't want to burn them out with making 10, 15 small decisions. An integrator should be making great decisions for the day-to-day of the business so the visionary could be freed up and making strategic decisions. If an integrator is making too many little details and they're not delegating, they will burn out. It's like the hierarchy of burnout.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. Rachel, you mentioned your website several times. What is your website? Because our listeners probably just want to go and read how they should talk to the visionaries. Or if
Sure.
they're visionaries, they want to know how to be talked to. So what is your website?
It's empoweredcoo.com.
Excellent. And in order to get your book, where should they go?
It's on Amazon. It's called Empowered COO, Eliminating Resentment, Burnout, and Self-Doubt as a Second in Command. And I am launching my platform, the Empowered COO Hub, by the end of January. So if you want to have access to the Empower bot and to a bunch of resources, check it out. It's on my website. You can sign up.
Excellent. Okay. And we were going to include it in the show notes as well, so our listeners will know where to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Adi.
You are very welcome. And thank you for being a guest. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.